This is our inaugural episode, episode number 1. So thank you very much for being here. We're going to be talking about the state of the state. You know, we're trendsetters here in Texas. A Texas city was the first city nationally to ban cannabis. And that city was El Paso, Texas, in the year 1915. In 1931, cannabis was banned statewide. By the year 1937, cannabis was banned federally by way of the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act. By 1973, that was the last time Texas saw any sort of penalty reduction for cannabis possession. It is now January 6th, 2020. We still don't have any change in penalty reduction for cannabis possession.
Hey, Dave, I wanted to touch on something right there. One of the things that absolutely amazes me about that is the fact that both party platforms in Texas support penalty reduction.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple as saying in Texas, oh, well, the conservative party is law and order and they don't want drugs. The conservative party in this state supports decriminalization or at least penalty reduction.
Right. Yeah.
So really, we're coming down to personal stances by people, not their party stance. Even when you think folks might be voting against you on a lot of issues, and they might be. On this one, this actually crosses both sides of the aisle in Texas. The other thing that always amazes me whenever anybody talks about the Tax Stamp Act is what an end run, like, oh, well, we can't quite make it illegal, so we'll make it so that there's a mechanism by which you could theoretically get a stamp to have it, and then they just never issued the stamp.
They didn't issue a single stamp. And if you applied for a stamp, then you were automatically admitting that you were, up until that point, breaking the law, so they would arrest you on the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of a catch-22 situation there. Thank you for that. Yeah, the marijuana tax stamp, 1937. And here we are, 2020, January 6th. Is a Monday. We are exactly 372 days away from the start of the 87th Texas legislative session. We'll get into a little bit more about what that means later on in this episode. Did you have something to say? No? All right. So today we're going to talk to our executive director, Jax Finkel. She's been on our board of directors for quite some time now, and we're just going to get right into it. Jax, how are you today?
Hello, I'm awesome. Good to be here with you.
Jax, talk about your history with activism in general, specifically your path with Texas NORML.
Well, it started back in the early aughts, or mid-aughts, I guess you could say. I met the executive director and his wife at the time. His name is Josh Schimberg, at a political party meeting. And he was working on cannabis. At the time, we called it marijuana. And I liked marijuana. So it was a nice fit. I was at that age where I was starting to really feel like I needed to be more civically engaged with my community and be more responsible for the things that are occurring around me. And that seemed like a really good avenue to start volunteering in. So I started in late 2005, early 2006 as the volunteer coordinator. And so I just would organize all of our events, the volunteers for that, any big projects we were running. And during that time, I really started to meet a lot of patients. And that hadn't been something that was really like in the forefront of my mind when I first got into activism. It was more like the law is wrong and people shouldn't go to jail. And then I kind of realized that there were a lot of additional consequences that were coming along for patients who just flat out had no access, and if they got caught, they went to jail. And, you know, being medically compromised, that was very difficult for some people. So it opened my eyes to a lot more of the real issues that people face every day, instead of just like the issues that you hear about at the time through like popular subculture conversations. And it became more real, and I had learned a lot more about civic engagement. So I understood that I could go up to the Capitol, I could do this, that, and the other. And I forget what year it was, but by 2012, I was the political legislative director. And in that year, that was when I decided a lot of people want to ask about, you know, where does the candidate stand on marijuana issues? And at the time, there was no voter guide for people to search online. League of Women Voters wasn't asking the question about it. And so I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a voter's guide. And so the Texas NORML team thought it was amazing, and we banded together. We created this really great product that other NORML chapters around the country started asking me for a checklist. Well, how do I do this? I want to make that happen.
Right.
And it's grown to where now we have, I think the first time it was just a couple dozen responses, and now we have a lot of people, including incumbents and sitting legislators, that participate in it. And now we also have voting records we can include in it, which, you know, we didn't have for many years. So after that, I became the deputy director. And in the 2015 session, whenever the Texas Compassionate Use Program passed, that's when I realized that I could not work a full-time job, dedicate time to this important cause, be a mom, be a wife, and have a life. Like that was not reality. And I didn't want to crash and burn. I really wanted to see through to some really, you know, important change. I wanted to see that through. And so at that point, I became the first staffer for Texas NORML. And I started as executive director and a staffer, I think it was like August of 2015. And I've been doing it ever since and just trying to grow and amplify the work that we're doing and continue to destigmatize the plant and the consumers and the patients that are part of this story, and trying to elevate the conversation that people are having as well, so that it's thoughtful and impassioned by their personal story, but also educated on the scientific facts and how to engage so that you can maximize your impact. When you're talking about someone who's been criminalized for possession, you may not even have a driver's license to drive. You know, so engaging with people and making sure that they can put written testimony if they email it to the clerk for the hearing, or we'll collect it for you and we'll submit it in a binder. Doing the same for patients, because, you know, you can't drive from El Paso, you know, to Austin on 5 days' notice maybe as a patient to come and give testimony, and then also potentially sit for hours and hours waiting for your turn to testify. Right. So just finding ways every day to better enable the conversation and the engagement, and to also change the focus a little bit. We were really focusing a lot on the legislative session and just doing all of our work in the session, but we really needed to lay more groundwork in between. It really became apparent that it's not 140 days every 2 years. It is 365 days a year, because prohibition doesn't sleep, so that means we can't either sometimes. So that's today, and now we have a podcast. So I'm talking with you about all the cool stuff we've done.
That's beautiful. So I know I've been working with you since about 2013, and at that time you were the deputy director. And I remember the historic growth when you became our first staffer, and I'm honored to have been a part of that. So I know that the progress that we've seen just since the years that I've been involved with you. You've been involved since 2005 or 6, roughly, you said.
Yeah.
Talk about the progress that you've seen and just how the dialogue has changed over the years.
So when I got involved in that time frame, there were 2 what they call legacy bills that were really being promoted. Representative Neistat from the greater Austin area, Representative Harold Dutton from the Houston area, from, I think it was like 1999, 97, or 2001, I forget the exact date. They started authoring these bills. And Dutton's bill would have taken an ounce or less and made it just one scale down lower penalty. And then Neistat's bill would have taken an affirmative defense, so meaning that a patient gets arrested with their cannabis, a doctor has told them that they should use it, they can use that as a defense in court, right? So that maybe at least you don't have to have a record or spend a lot of time in jail. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, they didn't get hearings in the beginning, and then they would have some hearings, and maybe they would die in committee. Maybe we would get a vote out of committee. You know, there was not a lot of action. And in 2013, the conversation went from those 2 legacy bills to, I want to say there was like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 bills that session, and a little bit more like actual conversation about implementation, because you have to remember 2013, that was right before all the stuff happened in Colorado. There was really a lot of momentum going on in the cannabis space, if you will. And that momentum, we were a little early on it, but that enabled us, after that session, nothing passed, of course, that momentum carried us into the 2015 session where we really had, for the first time, a robust conversation. There were bills about a comprehensive, full, whole plant cannabis program. There were limited medical bills. There were a variety of different types of decriminalization bills, from B2C bills to reducing it to a civil penalty. And it got to the point where we kind of had to, for the first time, pick priority legislation.
Yeah.
What's the best, instead of like, oh, well, this is what you get.
What a great problem to have.
Right. Options. Well, sometimes not so great, but mostly nice. And that year, we worked really hard, and a program was enacted. Unfortunately, it was very limited. As I'm sure you recall, it was low THC cannabis, and it was only for intractable epilepsy, and you had to have 2 doctors prescribe it to you, and it was under DPS's regulation. So this was not ideal, but marijuana started being grown in Texas sometime in 2017. And the legislators in 2017, we had dozens of bills. I want to say it was like 24 to 30 bills in the 2017 session. But leadership wanted to see how the medical program was playing out. Like, were these kids with intractable epilepsy going to abuse this medicine? Was it going to be an awful, the sky will fall type of situation? They were so worried about it. And so they basically told us that they weren't, going to give us anything. And that was extremely disappointing, because bare minimum, we could have had some kind of penalty reduction. Let's be real. We haven't changed our penalties for possession since 1973 in Texas. That's ridiculous. So with that frustration in our mindset, we took off through that interim and really worked really hard. And this last session in the beginning of the year in 2019, we had 63 bills about marijuana that were filed.
Wow.
And
That's
so,
historic.
yeah, it was definitely historic. Some were better than others. Like always, right?
Right.
Some had better chances than others. And so we've been able to kind of refine, how do we select priority legislation, how do we pivot on what our priorities are, due to what's happening in the legislature. But this session, we had some changes and a lot of momentous things. And I should go back to 2017 real quick and say, we didn't get a bill passed, but, for the first time we had multiple bills moving out of committee, being scheduled to be heard on the House floor. They didn't make it in time to be heard, but we were making the progress through the system quicker and quicker and farther, right? And then so in 2019, Representative Joe Moody had a bill that would have reduced an ounce of marijuana or less to a $250 fine for your first time for being arrested. It had to be modified. He negotiated with the governor's office, and they came up with something that they were happy with, I would say. And it passed with a bipartisan supermajority out of the House, and it headed over to the Senate, and the lieutenant governor was like, no, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. And that was really sad, because for the listeners that are not aware, excuse me, the lieutenant governor has total control over the Senate. And any bill that is going to move through the Senate, he is the one that assigns it to committees. So he is the total stopgap. So if he chooses not to assign it to a committee, it immediately dies. And that's what he essentially chose to do, unfortunately. But a hemp bill did make it through, and it was written by a Republican, did make it almost unanimously, I think only like one vote against it in the House maybe, and then totally unanimously through the Senate. And it was signed by the governor. And now we are working through the regulatory process as we speak. And there was also a medical bill. Now, multiple medical bills, right? So we've had a really limited medical bill from Representative Click that would have added, I think, like 3 conditions. And then we had a more comprehensive bill from Representative Lucio. It started out more robust, but of course he had to negotiate with the governor's office, and he did, and they came up with something that they thought would work well. His passed out of the House with a bipartisan supermajority, and on its heels, Click's bill passed out as well, and they both headed over to the Senate, but the lieutenant governor decided that it would be Click's bill that would advance, and the author on the Senate side was an ER doctor, Senator Donna Campbell, and she carried the bill, and she was able to add some more conditions. And that's what passed into law. So now we have, as of yesterday, the definition for one of the terms for the conditions has been defined. And so now we have what conditions that fall under incurable neurodegenerative diseases will be covered by the program. And it does have a little caveat that any physicians that have a new neurodegenerative disease that they want to add, they can petition to add it. So there is a way to try to add some more conditions if it falls into that category. So bit by bit, we are improving it. I think the biggest work that we have to do, besides, stop selecting arbitrary conditions that can be, utilized, cannabis can be utilized for, instead let doctors decide. I mean, I think hands down that's one of the bigger things, but also removing the arbitrary cap on THC and destigmatizing that portion of the plant. For some reason, all of the other cannabinoids are okay, and CBD is amazing, but THC, we can't have any euphoria. We're not down with that. So that is going to be a big focus, is destigmatizing that component, and also continuing to push on adding more conditions, with the focus being on a let doctors decide model. Not only on what conditions can use it, but what should the cannabinoid ratio be? I mean, that should be up to the doctor to decide that. And I know I'm preaching to the choir on that, but these are the types of conversations that we have to have in a thoughtful way. And, we're already seeing legislators, authoring bills, drafting bills. They can't file them until November of next year, but they're authoring them, having us review them, giving feedback, sharing them with the community, because they know that this is a campaign issue. And so really those are the next big steps, is the voter guide that's going to come out for the primary in late January, early February. And then the primaries are in March, which are going to be extremely important. And then going through the convention process so that we can ensure that the party platforms are supportive of marijuana law reform in Texas. Some people may or may not know that the Texas GOP has planks that actually support cannabis law reform. They have let doctors decide who should use medical cannabis as a plank. They have an ounce or less of possession should be a $100 fine and not arrestable. They have that we should have a hemp program, which we've now satisfied. So, that if that fell off, that'd be fine. And then also they want to reschedule cannabis at the federal level, not deschedule, which is a little bit more along the lines of what I would like to see. Right. But I mean, these are important things that we have to protect so that we can continue to point to them and say, the grassroots supports this. People are talking about this. You've made these changes. The sky has not fallen. Let's keep going with it. And then also, we might have some more federal pressure, because we've had some historic votes at the federal level now, with the Farm Bill happening at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019. Then now, the Banking and the MORE Act having their hearings in the House. So it's exciting. It's exciting, but it's also a little daunting because we still have a lot of work to do, especially here in Texas.
Yeah. So, I feel like you are very similar to me in the sense that your group of friends who aren't activists come to you with any sort of, what's going on in Texas, what's going on here. And I feel like a lot of my friends, at least what I've heard, there's some confusion. For a while, is CBD legal? Is it not legal? Is hemp? What's going on with that? Is it legal? Is it federally legal? Is it illegal here? And then also with the teacup, because it's so limited. We are technically a medical marijuana state, but it is so limited that I feel like there's some confusion or maybe a gap, if you will, between the public's perception of the progress that we're making versus the progress that we are actually making. Could you maybe touch on that and what you feel and what you see?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I thought was kind of unfortunate for public education was some of the clickbait titles that I saw in the media post the hemp bill rolling out. At the time of recording this, just to quantify that this is the space and time I'm talking about. This is where we're at.
Right. Yeah.
Whenever it rolled out, people realized, we only have testing to say, is there THC or is there not THC in this cannabis? And now certain cannabis is legal. if it has 0.3% THC or less. So how do we charge these people? Well, really, we can't, is the answer to that. We can't do it. And so that created some interesting changes in the way things that were being dealt with, and people were saying, oh, is it de facto legalization? No, that's not what happened. They're working out the testing. I'm hoping that they decide to not continue to invest in that failed policy, but theoretically, if you're arrested now for something, they can hold those contents until the testing's available, as long as they've charged you, and then they could, later actually, follow through with that. So I think that is one of the things that's most difficult, and especially because Texas has such a real patchwork of how they're enforcing the laws. A lot of the urban areas have decided to just stop. Just 4 ounces or less, an ounce or less, depending on the area. They are just DAs and prosecutors. They're not going through with the charges. So they're directing, PDs to not arrest for it. But in rural areas, many people are continuing to arrest and arresting for hemp flower in some cases. I've gotten several calls about that because they're like, well, we need to know that it's 0.3 THC.
Right.
And you can't test that on the side of the road. You have to send it out. And I think that some are starting to realize how expensive and prohibitive it is. So I would say that that's the most confusing thing that's recently happened. But also, whenever people say, medical marijuana has been, a program's recreated and it's legal in Texas, it's not the whole story. That's not the whole story. So you might go to your doctor and ask for them to, give you a prescription. No, that's not how it works. And then once you do get the prescription, you're limited in what you can get, which at this point in time, I had, heard that some people in the bureaucracy were pointing people to use over-the-counter hemp oil until all of the conditions got added so that they could get into the program. And I just want to say, as of right now, the hemp that you're buying in Texas, you can't be sure that it's been tested and is up to standards. There's no regulation in place yet. So, the stuff that you're getting over the counter at your local store, it may well and good be fine. But you as the customer right now, you really have to do your due diligence on that product, its testing, like look for certificate of authenticity. How long has that company been around? So right now it's really a lot of the onus is on the customer. I mean, which self-care and self-responsibility, that's something that is always there. But in general, you think, oh, I'm getting this over-the-counter supplement. It's at least been tested to be accurate. And we don't know that for sure yet. So coming soon, those regulations should be coming down the line, and then we can, more strongly be able to feel like what we're getting over-the-counter is what's in there. So if you're medically compromised, I would not advise you to use over-the-counter at this point in time. My assumption is that, all of the cannabis you get through the program is well tested, that the licensees are testing themselves, and then DPS is supposed to spot check them. But at least, you know where you're getting it from, that who you can go back to if there's an issue, you have more protections. And I think also it's really important for people that have kids, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, just, you can give your kid a CBD gummy, but in some cases that could be problematic. There have been cases where it has meant that, let's say that there was not a great situation between the parents and the kid ends up getting, tested for some custody thing. I've heard of several issues with that. So this would give you the protection to be able to say, no, my kid has a prescription, is registered in this program. That should be what's in their urine,
Right.
And so there's a lot of different ways that being in a program can protect you. There are some people who don't want to have to register on a registry, and I also certainly understand that feeling as well.
Yeah, for sure. I know people always come up to me and ask me, so when are they going to legalize in Texas? Well, I always tell them they are not. You have to do that work. So many people don't understand what that means. There's so many people, I feel like, that still think that you can collect X amount of signatures
Yes.
and get the work done. So what do you think is the most important thing that Texans in general need to know about this issue in our particular legislation?
Well, that you can have a direct impact on it. It can feel very removed when you kind of look at how our state is gerrymandered and how, we have to go through the legislature, and, these are the hurdles that we have to address. But if people really are thoughtful and they're registering to vote and they're keeping the cannabis issue in mind when they're voting, and they are engaging before, during, and after the legislative session, then, you can have an impact. Not everybody can make it up to the Capitol, but if you're on our email list, then you'll know, when is there a person you can email that it'll have, it'll make a difference, or when is there someone that you should call because right now they're, holding it up, or who can you say thank you so much for being our champion. And just really, we try to make it easy for people to engage. So sign up on the email list so that you can really stay on top of what's going on. We also are trying to make sure that people can be tapped into the regulatory process, because there is opportunity for public comment there to be able to let regulators know, it's really important to me that these human consumable, that is a hard word to say sometimes, that these products are tested for any adulterants, any dilutants, any, it should label all of the cannabinoids and terpenes that are in the product. You can lay out what you as a customer, what you need from that business, and that will be taken into account with the regulation. I mean, of course, we want to balance good regulatory practices and it being overly burdensome for businesses, because we do also want businesses to do well. But really, consumer impact is extremely important, and it's something you're ingesting. You just really need to know what it is.
Yeah. So what can our listeners be doing right now? What can they do today to take action to prepare themselves and to prepare going forward for the upcoming legislation in 2021?
So what I would say is make sure you're registered to vote in time for the primaries, because that's going to be coming up in March. And there's early voting in February, and we'll have the voter guide out. So number 1, register to vote. Number 2, get on our email list, because we'll send you the voter guide. We'll give you all that information. Go to texasnormal.org and check out. We're going to be doing some traveling workshops in January. We're going to have a lot of events that we've already got on the calendar for 2020, so you can stay engaged in that way. And we'll help walk you through the convention process, all of that. So if you go to texasnormal.org, you can learn a lot about what are the current laws and penalties. You can subscribe, you can find out who represents you, and then actually know what their voting record is even right now on our website. So I think that there's a lot of ways to get involved in that manner, but also follow us on social media, because there's a lot of interesting things happening in Texas. Sometimes we'll share information from other states, but really there's so much happening in Texas, we don't really have to. Like, we have plenty of content just from what's going on here. And I'm trying to think. I feel like there's something else that I'm not remembering right now, but.
Well, when you figure it out, let us know and we'll link it in the comments.
Okay, sounds good.
So I want to touch on one other thing now. You've been our executive director for Texas NORML since 2015. You're also the executive director for FIT, Foundation for Informed Texas. Tell us a little bit about FIT and what they do.
So we, our board has been talking about how can we expand? How can we help people in Texas? And part of that is, Texas NORML is a 501c4. And for those who aren't familiar with these different classifications, C4s can lobby. And they're not restricted on, time or money or anything like that. They can spend their funds on lobbying, and that's extremely important, but they're not tax deductible. And so we were getting a lot of feedback from people that they wanted the tax deductibility. They wanted to be able to donate to something that didn't have the word marijuana or cannabis in it. And so we created this 501c3 public charity, Foundation for an Informed Texas, and we use it to really reach out to rural areas, to make sure that they are educated on that we have a program, does the program service them? Does that upset you? Oh, look, here's what you can do about it. And we actually had the first ever medical cannabis ad on cable in Texas. And it played on MSNBC and Fox News.
Wow.
And we did some community conversations surrounding that where we had medical professionals, doctors, patients, veterans coming with us to the community to engage in this conversation and this education. And through that program, we actually were able to reach about 1.8 million Texans.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was really important. And through the foundation, we've been able to elevate some of the work that Texas NORML is doing, that is 501c3, work, and then also being able to work with our coalition to make sure that, they can put on great conferences, that we're able to help with resources throughout the session, any educational items like that. That's something that we've really been able to hone in on. And I'm looking forward to 2020 because we've got a lot planned, not only for Texas NORML, but for the foundation. It's definitely a lot of work, but it's worth it. And thankfully, both of the boards, you sit on the Texas NORML board, but both of the boards have a lot of really great advocates and volunteers who are super dedicated to the mission and to trying to work as a team to get as much done as possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Jax, thank you very, very much for your time. Everybody go to texasnormal.org. Also check out FIT. Remember, FIT is a 501c3 tax-deductible organization. So if you want to donate some money to help the cause and you want to get a deduction, then go check out FIT. Guys, thank you very, very much.